Following the train derailment at 8:54, the first 911 call to the East Palestino Police was received at 8:56. At 8:58, the first alarm to Station 24 went out to request all available fire and EMS personnel to respond to Pleasant and East Taggart Street for train derailment and fire. At about 9 p.m., the East Palestine Volunteer Fire Department arrived on scene. A second alarm to Station 24 went out at about 9:01, requesting all available fire and EMS to report to the station and respond to East Taggart and Alice Street. East Palestine Dispatch contacted the Norfolk Southern in Atlanta, Georgia at 9:04 to obtain information. Norfolk Southern took their information and instructed them that they would call back. At 9:07, the incident commander called dispatch from the scene to request a hazmat team and an engine and tanker from Springfield. At about 9:08, East Palestine Dispatch sent a request to Station 11 and Station 24 requesting all available personnel to respond. At 9:10, the director of the Columbiana County Emergency Management Agency received a cell phone call as the initial notification of the incident. At 9:15, the director of the Columbiana County EMA called the manager of Beaver County, Pennsylvania EMA to request hazmat mutual aid response. At 9:19, the train crew of 32N radioed the Norfolk Southern Railroad dispatcher and requested to cut the locomotives away from the train. The dispatcher approved the movement, and the locomotives were moved about 300 feet east of the train. At 9:24, the fire chief from the East Liverpool Fire Department Hazmat received the first notification of the activation. At 9:27, the train conductor, referencing his hazmat guidebook, learned the guidebook indicated they should be 1 mile away from the hazardous material, so the locomotives were moved east about 1 mile from their train. At 9:35, the Beaver County Emergency Services was notified and assistance requested. A full response was initiated from Beaver County Stations 11, 18, and 22. At about 9:45, the East Palestine Police Department began evacuating residential dwellings on Taggart Street and Clark Street that were close to the fire. At 10:23, the fire chief and East Liverpool Fire Department received an emailed train consist from the director of the Columbiana County EMA. At 10:34, Ohio State Patrol advised a 1 mile evacuation to be implemented. At about 11 p.m., Norfolk Southern hazmat personnel arrived on scene, and a railroad contractor arrived shortly thereafter. About midnight, fire suppression operations were suspended due to the hazmat lading of the tank cars and prescribed response procedure guidance being identified. The incident command post was also relocated to the East Palestine Fire Department. Mr. Stansel will now provide an overview of the hazardous materials investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Paya. Train 32N was a mixed freight train that included a total of 20 tank cars of hazardous materials as defined by Department of Transportation regulations, including 17 loaded tank cars with their quantities indicated on this slide, and 3 empty tank cars with residues. The derailment involved 11 of these 20 hazardous materials tank cars. 8 of the 11 derailed tank cars shown in this table released hazardous material commodities following the derailment. 3 DOT-111 tank cars carrying flammable and combustible materials, car numbers 36, 38, and 50, were initially breached by mechanical damage. All 5 DOT-105 vinyl chloride tank cars that were ultimately subjected to an explosives-induced vent and burn action 3 days after the derailment were not initially breached by the derailment damage. The following video further describes the release of hazardous materials and some key events that culminated in the incident command conducting a vent and burn action on the 5 tank cars loaded with vinyl chloride monomer on February 6, 2023. The train was transporting hazardous materials in 17 loaded tank cars and in 3 empty tank cars with residue. 11 of the derailed tank cars contained hazardous materials, including 5 specification DOT-105 tank cars loaded with 115,580 gallons of stabilized vinyl chloride monomer, a liquefied compressed flammable gas. NTSB investigators determined the initial derailment damage included 1 breached DOT-111 tank car containing flammable liquid, butyl acrylate, and 2 breached DOT-111 tank cars containing combustible liquids, 2-ethyl hexyl acrylate, and ethylene glycol monobutyl ether. These released materials became involved in the post-derailment fire. The derailment also resulted in the breach of 6 tank cars containing non-hazardous liquids, including propylene glycol, diethylene glycol, and petroleum lubricating oil, which also ignited. Additionally, post-derailment fires burned 6 other derailed hopper cars carrying polyethylene plastic pellets and polyvinyl chloride granular plastic, as well as 3 boxcars carrying other non-hazardous freight. The 5 vinyl chloride tank cars were exposed to pool fire conditions in the derailment pileup. This led to their pressure relief devices venting pressure and reclosing after normal pressure was restored within the tank cars. This is part of the normal functioning of a tank car's thermal protection system. All vapor released through the pressure relief devices ignited, as is typical in most derailment scenarios involving flammable materials where sources of ignition are present. On the early evening of Saturday, February 4, 1 vinyl chloride tank car forcefully released burning vapor over a 70-minute period. This was the last time any of the vinyl chloride tank cars vented material through their pressure relief devices. By the morning of February 5, emergency responders had mitigated the fire, but the vinyl chloride tank cars continued to concern authorities because their pressure relief devices had stopped operating and the temperature had risen as measured on the tank car shell surfaces. Emergency response crews found valves and fittings were thermally damaged, making them unusable for unloading the tank cars. The incident commanders ultimately scheduled a controlled vent and burn of the 5 vinyl chloride tank cars, which they determined was their last available mitigation option to avoid the risk of catastrophic tank failures that could have propelled fractured tank parts into residential areas. To prepare for the vent and burn, incident commanders expanded the evacuation zone to a 1-mile by 2-mile area. Crews dug pits to contain released vinyl chloride liquid while it vaporized and burned. On Monday, February 6, about 4:37 p.m., incident commanders initiated the vent and burn operation with tank car breaching explosive charges. The released vinyl chloride burned throughout the night of February 6. Wreckage clearing began on Tuesday, February 7. Residual fires were extinguished by noon on February 8.